Hey y'all, welcome to another episode of Cosmetics and Culture.
Today we will be talking about journalists in the Vietnam War, and we will be doing a vibrant eyeshadow look.
For anyone new, we go over historical moments by starting off with some facts and then diving into our opinions of the actions that took place.
Yes, so we will go through stories that took place and other fun facts.
I guess let's start then. Journalists used to be able to go directly onto the battlefield in Vietnam to collect stories regarding the Vietnam War to send back to the U.S.
This caused the Vietnam War to be nicknamed the living room of war. Now being permitted on the ground was reserved for higher-up journalists who had connections or high influence in the media, so not an everyday blogger could go onto a live battlefield and take a selfie with a soldier.
The war lasted from 1959 to 1975 and was thought to be over quick and easy, but after the Tet Offensive launched by the Communist North Vietnam, it showed the end to be nowhere in sight. This eventually led to journalists taking advantage of the technological advancements of the decade to broadcast and share events going on in Vietnam.
While sharing events seemed like a good idea, it also resulted in lack of privacy and dangerous circumstances for reporters and soldiers.
Thank you, Wesley. Starting off, I do have a question. What the heck was wrong with these people?
What do you mean?
Why would a reporter be so desperate to go on a live battlefield as people are shooting at them and go to a soldier and be like, so how has the war been so far?
Okay, thank you. It's like no one wants to read your stupid article anyway, so maybe don't get blown up for nothing?
Well, many people did want to know, but what was happening overseas was not to the extent of violating the privacy of U.S. citizens.
True, but at the same time, broadcasts were taking place that people gradually began to favor, and up-close articles were only shown 27% of the time.
Well, I read an article where a guy named Walter Cronkite, which is such a weird name. Say that three times. Walter Cronkite, Anyway, he said, journalism is what we need. Make democracy work.
Okay, but that's still violating citizens' privacy. Democracy doesn't mean anything if the privacy and mental health of her people are being put at risk.
Facts.
My grandfather, who was in the Vietnam War, told me a story about one of my grandmother's friends who was just sitting at home when she heard a knock at the door. When she opened it, she found a reporter standing there with a notepad and camera asking her how she felt about her husband being killed in battle. She hadn't even gotten a telegram about it. She heard her husband was killed by a middle-aged, receding hairline reporter. Well, turns out her husband didn't die, and she nearly had a heart attack when he walked in the front door just 2 weeks after getting the news.
And see, she went through that mental struggle for a false story. How many other times do you think that happened?
I don't know, but I am amazed by the true stupidity and desperation of people. Again, I would rather just see a movie than read their little story.
I know. I'd rather see a young Tom Cruise shoot a gun rather than read some big-worded essay that may or may not be true. Like, why am I getting invested in Bobby, who died fighting when I probably just saw him at McDonald's getting a Big Mac?
Facts.
I also remember a story of a teenage girl our age whose mom died a few years before her dad got to Vietnam, and both sides of her family either lived across the country or were dead. But she had a similar experience as the woman in your story, where she opened the door and she got blinded by a camera flashing her face as a mid-aged 20s man was standing there. We can both agree that guys may or may not know how to present sad news, but this idiot looked at this 18-year-old girl in the eye and asked her, how did you react to knowing your father was burned alive in combat this time yesterday?
What the actual heck?
She clearly was upset and literally collapsed on the ground, and rather than comfort her, he took a picture of her and named it an article of a morning nation with her picture as the cover.
My God, how much of a loser has to profit from a person's misery? See, I would 100% sue at that point.
Like, am I allowed to punch someone if they instigated by potentially blinding me with a camera? He didn't know I have an eye problem.
Sounds perfectly legal to me.
Thank you.
I heard from Coach Webb that only 59 or 64 reporters and journalists were killed in the entire time of the war. Do you think that's true?
I think no innocent person should ever be killed, but my question is, how were they not noticed or shot more? Journalists and reporters would sometimes walk up to soldiers fighting for their life and ask them, how do you feel about shooting and living a person? Can I take your picture? That's just so crazy.
Between the helicopters and cars driving through literal jungles, they would be able to be targeted more easily. Also, the flashing of the cameras should have totally altered the Viet Cong or Viet Minh.
Do you think that journalists turn people away from the war as well?
Daniel Ellisberg, who is a political activist who worked with the RAND organization, was a supporter of the war, but once the Pentagon Papers were released, he opposed the war. That shows how journalism turned people away, I guess.
Journalism! Don't get me started on the stupid Pentagon Papers. A literal report of every historic war connection that the U.S. has been involved with came out and came out and they still sent reporters to Vietnam. How low of an IQ does a person need to look at their journalists and be like, hey, how would you like to go to a place that you don't know, or possibly die or be tortured if caught, and interview soldiers that are fighting for their lives so you can write an article for a place everyone in the country hates? But just remember, to get something interesting or you don't get paid, jazz hands.
I will admit the one thing I'm still curious about is what do we still not know about events that took place in Vietnam? The war lasted from the 50s to the 70s, and like we already said, if the story isn't interesting, it won't sell. So that means many of the stories we know may be exaggerated or a straight up lie.
It's definitely sad that the privacy of not only the families of soldiers, but also the deceased themselves may have been tampered with.
So in all, we have journalists risking their lives for false stories that endangered the privacy of citizens that were only watched or read 30% of the time because over half the country hated the war. Am I correct?
You're correct as much as those stories were exaggerated. Oh, don't forget that the country hid stories as well.
Oh yes, thank you for reminding me.
Well, that's why we are here, to remind people about the past so we can judge other people's actions past and present.
Well, I guess that since we finished our makeup, that's the end of our rant sesh.
Thanks everyone for listening to our side of the story, and we hope you have a great day.